One very quick question. Bottom line, does stopping burning fossil fuels, does that...
Good morning, Holy Spirit.
This is a prophetic.
And
it will come under the disguise of controlling nature. Global warming. Global warming wabazungu tatukwatako. Bagenda kutawanya omwezi. Bakyuse amaizi z'omwezi. Bazikasuka mu Africa. Gw'omwezi kukwojja atazaalibwa bantu.
South Sudan's government is closing down all schools starting Monday as the country prepares for a wave of extreme heat expected to last 2 weeks. The Health and Education Ministries advise parents to keep all children indoors as temperatures are expected to soar to 45 degrees Celsius in a statement last Saturday. They warn that any school found open during that time will have its registration withdrawn, but didn't specify how long the schools will remain shuttered. The ministry said they will continue to monitor the situation and inform the public accordingly.
Linda, sifa abasalebi walati. Bagenda chikasuka. Teknolojia ya mwatuse. Bagenda jidaivatinga. Bagibasindikire. Kati nebo babula babulina amagezi mu jetasi. N'omugagga tawangulu. Era yo contract bajjagibwa akasajja n'akasajja ako. Mukama bakaligenda mu nsi nkyuba maazi. Akasajja ako kanzijidde nnyo. Katemu. Bagagga naye batemu. Tebabalina bulamu bw'abantu. It is soul sacrifice. Banagagga bonna bagenda kutuula wamu. Balabe tutabaani. Africa will be the first. Kubanga we are a dumping country.
Temperature in southern Africa has increased, with many countries now experiencing record temperatures that have consequences for human health and food security. That's according to climate experts, who believe that the temperature increase is already having a negative impact across the region. The extended period of high temperatures and dry conditions have led to wildfires throughout the region, and many countries could also face droughts.
They are extreme temperatures that are not a normal situation. So it's 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 days, maybe in a row, where the temperature is much warmer than it was before. So he's seeing record temperatures. Now, if we look at two things, one is the trend over the last 50 years. We've seen that the temperature has gone up around about 1/3 of a degree per decade. So in 3 decades, it's gone up by a degree on average.
The heat waves associated with high temperatures pose a threat to food production, with failed maize crops being reported. Prolonged exposure to high temperatures places many at risk of heat stroke and heat exhaustion, and this could even affect healthy individuals. Rural communities are particularly at risk of this increase in temperatures because there is not as much developed infrastructure that can shield individuals from the soaring temperatures. And the danger extreme temperatures pose to vulnerable groups increases as the length of the temperature spikes increase.
We're starting to see some of the first serious health effects for farm workers who work in exposed situations. And, things like people even dying of heat stress under these sorts of circumstances. Older people tend to be very vulnerable to these sorts of effects in particular, especially if they're living in housing that is inadequate.
For now, forecast models indicate that these high temperatures will persist across southern Africa, with the entire Botswana, the interior of Namibia, and parts of central and northern South Africa likely to be the worst affected.
Let me tell you, bagenda kutula kukumeza gwali kuwanvu nga wetodduka abasajja bangi abagagga nga bagamba if you want to control the global warming, let's kill billions of people. The target place was Africa. Are you in Africa?
Yes.
Are you in Africa?
Yes.
Zunga ati government etuwadde ebiboweerere. Bannange gye tugenda wabi! Gye tugenda waki? Alina amatu!
Now, the average temperature of the world's oceans is at its highest since records began. It's believed to be rising faster than at any time in at least 2,000 years. This has serious implications, not least for the world's coral reefs. Marine scientists are warning a mass bleaching of coral could be unfolding right now in the southern hemisphere, perhaps the worst in the planet's history. Now, according to the EU's Copernicus Climate Change Service, the average global sea surface temperature has exceeded the previous record of 20.98 degrees Celsius, now standing at 21.06 degrees. Doesn't sound like much of an increase, does it? But in fact, this is way off the charts of what's normal, and it matters because it threatens fish stocks while ramping up hurricanes and speeding up the collapse of the polar ice sheets. Scientists stress healthy oceans are critical to our life on Earth. They feed us, they regulate our climate, and generate most of the oxygen that we breathe. They also provide more than 3 billion jobs globally. Well, we can speak to Carla Buontempo, who's director of Copernicus Climate Change Service, joins us live now from Brussels. You compiled the report at Copernicus, and oceans clearly hotter now than ever. It's an ocean heat wave, no less. Why is this happening?
Well, there are a number of reasons why this is happening, and certainly the fact that over the last few months we have been through El Niño phase. So this is the warm phase of the El Niño Southern Oscillation, which typically modulate the temperature of the tropical ocean, Pacific Ocean. But what is remarkable of these extremes you were talking about is that the anomaly in the surface of the ocean temperature is not limited to the Pacific. Actually, now that El Niño is going back and is going towards neutral condition, is really what's happening in the Atlantic, North Atlantic, South Atlantic, and to some extent the Indian Ocean. That is quite significant. In most places, especially in the Atlantic, we are at record-breaking temperature. We have never seen temperatures so high in the basin. And as you were saying in your introduction, this is having a number of consequences for the ocean itself.
Yeah, I was going to say, because the oceans are sucking up all this heat, and it must create the effect of, you know, ramping up hurricanes and so forth, and the impacts on ice sheets, sea level rise. The impacts are many and various, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, I mean, to pick one of the list of impact you were mentioning, certainly we do know that the higher temperature in the ocean are one of the ingredients fueling more intense storm. And this is one of the reasons we see that the intensity of the most intense precipitation is in the summary for policymaker in the last assessment report of the IPCC. The intensity of the most intense precipitation is going up, and it's not just a prediction in our climate model, it's really an observation that we see all over the continent. So El Niño played a role. What we are seeing in the Atlantic is not directly related to El Niño. The peak incoming radiation from the sun is another effect that piles up on others. But fundamentally, we wouldn't be able to see what we are seeing now, what we are observing now, had not been for the increase in the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So we are record high in terms of CO2, in terms of methane emission, and these adds up. We do know that the climate system responds to the concentration of greenhouse gases. And this is fundamental to explain the record-breaking temperature that we have seen, not just in the ocean, but in the entire climate system. So February was the warmest February record.
That's right, the warmest February, which is a part of a long streak of records in recent months. And the impacts, as I say, as far as the ocean's concerned, not just physical, but it's just the marine life, which means that are impacted, which means that fish stocks are hit, which is fundamental for human life, really, in terms of food and for jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, temperature is one of the key components defining the biological niches where many ecosystems live, and the increasing global mean temperature means the modification of these niches and the propagation or the extension of others. But fundamentally, this is having already an impact on coral, is having an impact on fish stock. Fundamental, what's happening in the ocean for me is one specific instance of a more general shift. So the climate that we are experiencing today and the evolution of the sea surface temperature, I think, is a good example of it. It's a climate we have not experienced ever in our lifetime. Any person alive today on the planet has never lived through an ocean this warm. But more importantly, our civilization has never had to cope with